Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and wouldn't you know it, depth might be overrated. Who could have predicted that looking at these NBA's Final Four? Plus, ways to make Zach Edey and Jalen Wells even better than they already are, and a little bit of Summer League dreaming here late in the month of May. It's Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for being here with me on this Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host, flying solo once more, but for the final time. You know, on a Friday, we got to get down on a Friday. Tomorrow's episode, DeMichael and I will be back together talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball. But for now, it is I, Joe Mullinax, once more picking up where DeMichael left off yesterday, and I'm excited to be with you for the next little while talking about Grizzlies basketball here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure that you're hanging out with me and DeMichael each and every time that an episode drops. DeMichael did a great job yesterday talking about Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, getting first-team all-rookie NBA designations. And those are well-deserved awards for the exact reasons that DeMichael laid out yesterday. Folks overthinking the Zach Edey selection, not going to name any names, but people hating on that pick for not very good reasons, at least as far as I can see. And when it comes to Jalen Wells being perhaps the best draft pick of the 2024 NBA draft, a young prospect coming up from Division II, Sonoma State to Washington State, getting all the way to the NBA and looking very much a part of a playoff team. I think it's fair to still call the Memphis Grizzlies a playoff team's rotation moving forward. But notice the key word that I used in that phrase, rotation. And I do think that there's an argument to be made as we start this Thursday edition of the show for improving the veteran depth of the Memphis Grizzlies in such a way that it would allow players such as Jalen Wells, such as Zach Edey, the chance to potentially be reserves. And how in the world could the Memphis Grizzlies get there, you might be asking? That seems like a pipe dream to me, Joe. You're making stuff up. Not so fast, my dear friends, my dear everydayers, hopefully, that are with us each and every time a show comes out here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is possible, given the way that the Memphis Grizzlies have set things up with cap space this summer, that they could get a little bit froggy, a little bit flexible with what they do. And I want to shout out old friend Matt Hardlicka, back to my Grizzly Bear Blues days over a decade ago. We used to write and work together over at SB Nation. He now has a Substack that you most certainly should, or a Patreon, excuse me. He has a Patreon that you most certainly should subscribe to. The Grizzlies heading into next year, and this is from Matt's Substack, $7.3 million in cap space, including an $11 million hold for Santi Aldama. There are ways for Memphis to operate as a team that could free up even more cap space than that. The Grizzlies could sign and trade Aldama, again reading from Matt's piece, Santi Aldama at about a $16.67 million salary, and that could get them to $24.17 million in cap space. And that gets you into, as Matt alludes to in his piece, Cam Johnson, Kevin Huerter, Trey Murphy potentially, if there was front-loaded offers with Santi and they added in multiple picks. Maybe New Orleans isn't interested in moving on from Trey Murphy, would certainly be righting some wrongs from the Zaire Williams trade. But that's important to point out, is understanding that if you work the cap a certain way, they can get to cap space that they may not have had before. And you can bring in players that you would not have had access to before if you had held on to, say, Marcus Smart at the trade deadline. The Grizzlies could also interact with other teams like the Detroit Pistons, as Matt alluded to, getting that $24 million in cap space, finding ways to bring in like a Naz Reid, a Quentin Grimes, and restricted free agency. There's lots of ways that Memphis could use the contracts of Santi Aldama, could use John Konchar's deal with other squads like the Pistons, freeing up cap space to bring in veteran players. Imagine Naz Reid starting next to Jaren Jackson Jr. How awesome would that be? Sign me up. It's possible given what Memphis has done with their roster already. Imagine if the Grizzlies had a way to, on top of Naz Reid, just make it Timberwolves South, bring in Nickeil Alexander-Walker with the mid-level exception. And you still have Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and John Morant on the roster. Replace Wells and Edey with Alexander Walker and Naz Reid. Or you could simply replace one of them, perhaps Edey, and you stick with Jalen Wells as your bigger, wing player, and Alexander Walker serves as your bench guy, your sixth man. Think of the things that you can do if you add veteran depth in those ways to allow for Jalen and Zach to not be asked to do so much. The fact that the Memphis Grizzlies as a playoff team had two rookies that were first team all rookie starting for them. The fact that the Grizzlies were the number 2 seed for a long stretch of this season, that is remarkable when you think about it. It is the exception, not the rule. Imagine how much better they could be, and in particular, how much better the Memphis Grizzlies could be if Wells and Edey were able to play reduced roles. Not saying that they shouldn't be starters, not saying that they shouldn't get big minutes. If you were able to execute the type of transactions that brought in 2 veteran starting caliber players, Wells could easily still play 24 to 26 minutes a game. Zach Edey could easily still play 24 to 26 minutes a game. How valuable is depth in the modern NBA? We'll talk more about that later in the show. But I can't help but wonder, as good as Jalen Wells has been and as good as Zach Edey has been, they've been asked to do so much, and I've talked about it numerous times here on Locked On Grizzlies. Perhaps I'm scarred by the memory of the 2017-2018 Memphis Grizzlies when a rookie Dillon Brooks, as a second-round pick, was asked to do way too much, and how that has impacted, or at least impacted, his Memphis career. Dillon saw himself as something that he wasn't. Now, I don't think that Jalen Wells and Zach Edey are of a similar mind frame to Dillon. I don't know that there's going to be boombox dancing and trash talking to King James and Anthony Davis anytime soon from those guys. But at the same time, the fact remains that if you have talented young players and you put them in better positions to be successful, where they're not asked to do more than they should be asked to do, how much value does that hold for a team like the Memphis Grizzlies? To me, the answer is a lot of value. Putting them in positions where they don't have to defend the best player on the floor every timeout. Positions where they can't be taken advantage of because they are going against a elite pick and roll big and guard tandem. Imagine Zach Edey playing against reserves the majority of the time. Or Jalen Wells defending second and third options. Imagine those guys helping lead a bench, a championship bench. That's a vision that I have for those two. So we talk a lot about how the Grizzlies are going to be able to keep all 3 of these dudes, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. They have cost-controlled rookies in Wells and Edey and others that could add to the depth of the team. They have the potential now, because of the Marcus Smart trade, as poorly as it ended in Memphis. You took a step back this year, no doubt, but you have the capacity to add players within the realm of a Reed and Alexander Walker, other types of wings, if you don't want to go full Minnesota South. And you can do that while maintaining your core and improving not just your starting lineup. The statistics bear out that Wells and Edey were really good in terms of being starters. It's not about needing to fix the starting lineup. It's about improving your depth for quality depth when it comes playoff time. Because do you really need to run a 11-man rotation? Probably not. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next here on Locked On Grizzlies. The significance of depth, how the NBA playoffs are perhaps showing that to be a bit over-exaggerated. Stick around for that conversation here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. The conference finals are here, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you have a read on who's hitting up in any given game, back it up with a same game parlay. And you could also add a $200 bonus in bets, adding to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits. FanDuel is a blast this time of year and all times of the year. Make sure you're checking them out if you haven't already done so. And if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up again. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. So to Michael Cole, my wonderful co-host, who, again, we will be back together for the first time in too long on our Friday show. We got to get down on a Friday. You everydayers know that to be true. DeMichael wrote a great piece for the Commercial Appeal talking about how depth doesn't seem to be as valued as perhaps it has been in the past. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that if you look at these conference finals teams. The New York Knicks are the most glaring example, right? The Knicks have gone all in, especially with their starting five. Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, Karl Anthony Towns. They got some other reserve players, some bench guys that contribute, but it's certainly not the 10 or 11 deep that the Memphis Grizzlies were at times this season. The same thing is true of the Indiana Pacers. They go maybe 9 deep. They have reserves that are capable of playing at a high level, but they don't have so much depth that there's numerous guys that aren't logging minutes that are good basketball players. The Oklahoma City Thunder might be the biggest exception to this, right? One of the reasons they are the team that they are is they can go 10, perhaps even 11 deep with legitimate NBA high-level contributions. That's the exception, not the rule. I don't think anybody's advocating for the Memphis Grizzlies to go full OKC and completely blast this thing out into the sky with a rebuild. Then you have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who we've talked a lot about on this episode. We like Naz Reid, like NAW. But think about the Timberwolves for a moment. Would the Timberwolves be better if they didn't play Mike Conley at all? That's an interesting question. But they didn't get much out of Conley in Game 1. And because of that issue, could it make more sense to let Dante DiVincenzo be that guy and condense their rotation even more? All this is to say that beyond the likes of the Thunder, who are not just primed for success now, but well down the road with all their draft capital that they've accumulated, beyond the Thunder, the exception to the rule, how valuable is depth really? And that comes back to the point that I was making earlier on in the podcast. If you have Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jalen Wells and Zach Edey, how much more do you need beyond that in terms of a true rotation that is going to help you win 16 games in the playoffs? Because once you get to the playoffs, not the play-in, the playoffs, once you get to the playoffs, that's the goal, trying to win 16 games. Are you going to be able to do that with Joe Morant as your best player? That's a question that we've contemplated a couple of different times here on the show over the last couple of weeks. But if you're going to operate under the assumption that you can, because you have Desmond Bane and you have Jaren Jackson Jr., and you believe in those two key cogs as supporters around Ja, that's all well and good. I'm not saying that's wrong to believe. But what I do think is important to understand and align with that line of thinking is that Ja Morant needs support, and that Jaren and Dez, none of those guys are capable at this point of being the higher level superstar contributor on a night in, night out basis for a variety of reasons, right? If Ja stayed healthy and was on the floor more consistently, I think you can make the argument he can be that guy. But we haven't seen that consistently enough. And then it comes down to ability, wherewithal for Bane and Jackson Jr. both. You need those veteran pieces that provide that depth. But how much do you need beyond that? Ja, Dez, Jaren, Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Again, this is just a hypothetical. Scottie Pippen Jr., Jalen Wells, Zach Edey. Combo forward, somebody that can play the 3-4, and I think you're set. And there's your 9. So how do you get to that ninth guy? You make moves, you get tricky in transactions. Maybe you nail another second-round pick. Whatever the case might be, there's lanes for you to operate in where you can get to that ninth piece. And I do think that that could be enough. Now, the guys that are 10 through 15, perhaps they're not quite as good as they have been in the past. And I do think that there's going to be somebody listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, and you're going to hit me up in the comments, hopefully, or shout me out on X at Joe Mullinax, and you're going to say, Joe, have you not been watching Grizzlies basketball? These guys are injured all the time. Of course they need the depth. Maybe so. You're not incorrect about the plethora of injuries they've seemed to endure the last couple of years. But it's difficult to plan for that, right? Especially if your aspirations are championship or bust. What would happen if Karl Anthony Towns got hurt for the New York Knicks right now? What would happen if Jalen Brunson got injured? Do we really think the Knicks are in the Eastern Conference Finals? Probably not. Look at what happened to the Boston Celtics. They lost Jason Tatum, and it essentially doomed their season. Jason Tatum is their best player. What would have happened if they didn't have all that money invested in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and they spread it out a little bit more? They spread out the love and the wealth. Maybe they weren't an 8 or 9 deep rotation. They were able to go 10 or 11. Does that really make a difference in terms of Boston beating New York in the semifinals of the Eastern Conference playoffs? I would argue it doesn't. If you lose these guys, you're in trouble regardless. So if you operate under the assumption that you may not have Joe Morant for 25 or 30 games out of the year, you can't have that plan B mentality to start out your journey. You're lowering your ceiling considerably. And the Grizzlies should be shooting for the stars because they're running out of time. They're running out of time as this window gets a little bit closer, more closed by the day, by the week, by the month. We've talked a lot about this new view with the new CBA of the 2 major paid stars. The Grizzlies are going to have 3. Is that tenable in the league's smallest market? Is that something that can stick around? I think that's a fair question to ask. So the window's getting smaller with this era of Grizzlies basketball. Are you really going to enter into that conversation saying, well, you got to chalk up Jaw for missing this many and Dez for missing this many? If that's the way you're thinking of it, maybe you should move on from this era entirely. But I want to stress that's not my mindset. Where I'm at in terms of reading DeMichael's piece saying depth is overrated, I want to go and get those veteran cogs. I want the younger players like Wells and Edey to be in a reserve role or a lesser minutes role, even if they stay as starters. And I want them to be strategically used in a means that allows for them to maximize what they do well and minimize what they struggle with. Well, Joe, that's what everybody's trying to do. Sure. But if we're trying to make chicken salad out of chicken, you know what? The purpose of the Marcus Smart trade, while in hindsight and in fairness to some, they saw it at the time, that was essentially punting on the 2024-2025 Memphis Grizzlies. You are in a place, in a realm of possibility now where you can maneuver around the cap and you can bring in players that, while you may lose a John Conchar, who's a great break glass in case of emergency end of rotation guy, you might even lose a G.G. Jackson or a Vince Williams Jr. to try to sweeten the pot on some of these deals. But are you trying to win now or not? What did you see from G.G. Jackson that makes you think that you're going to win now with G.G. in the fold? Nothing should be your answer, because that would be the correct answer. Nothing that suggests that G.G. Jackson is the kind of player that can do what a winning Grizzlies team needs for him to do in the here and now. And if that is the reality, if that is the circumstance, why hold on to that guy looking down the road? Gigi only has 2 or 3 years left on his contract. He's eventually going to cost money if he gets better the way that you think he's going to get better. The dual windows, the dual timelines that we've talked about in the past, this idea of being a contender and being set up for the future at the same time. I'm done with that. I like the idea of depth being overrated. I want to give up not on these players because I do think G.G. Jackson is going to be a good player, but he's going to be good enough in the John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. title window. If the answer is no, which I think it is, use him to bring in guys that are helping you to get there now. That should be the priority because that is where the money has been invested. Let me know on YouTube. Hit me up in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. How are you feeling about the depth being overrated conversation? Do you agree with me that going a little more all in makes sense for this crew? When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will close out this episode of the show dreaming of summer league in particular. Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies on this Thursday edition of the podcast. It is I, Joe Mullinax. So glad to be here with you. Thank you for joining us each and every time that an episode drops. Hopefully you're an everydayer at this point. If you're not, by all means, hit the subscribe, like, comment button. Be a part of our community here, our little corner of the internet that we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. I miss Grizzlies basketball, as crazy as that is to say, as poorly as the season ended, right? I've gotten the bad taste out of my mouth. I want to watch Grizzlies basketball once more, and it's got me thinking about Summer League. And I'm excited about the Summer League, the Salt Lake City stuff that the Grizzlies do. Obviously, they have the connection with Las Vegas like everybody in the league has come July. And I really am intrigued by what the Summer League team is going to be, assuming these guys are still here. Right? Now, Jalen Wells, Zach Edey, depending on how active they are in the Summer League process, they, of course, figure to be a part of the Grizzlies' 2025-2026 campaign. But a guy like a J.D. Jackson, how is he going to take to the opportunity, developing his game, getting healthy, working on things that he needs to improve upon, namely defense? Right? The last time we were together and I was with you here on Locked On Grizzlies, the pigeon thing bothered me. Gigi, you were one of the biggest pigeons in the entire NBA last year. Are you going to take your 6'9" frame and be a better defender? That's what I want to see. Cam Spencer, I know DeMichael talked about him on yesterday's show. The dog, right? Dog Cam Spencer. Can he show facilitation skill? Can he be that guy who slides in and become the cheaper Luke Kennard replacement that we've talked about before? Can he be that guy? Converting him out of a two-way contract. Whoever Memphis selects in the NBA draft, whoever they sign as an undrafted rookie, whether it's for Summer League purposes, whether it's for G League purposes, reloading the Memphis hustle. Numerous members of the Grizzlies roster over the years developed in the G League through the South Haven system. So how they implement that, it just has my mind wandering. What are these guys going to be asked to do? How is it going to look under Tuomas Isalo? How will the coaching staff evolve? It's going to be our first real chance to see some of those things tangibly in action. What does a Tuomas Isalo system look like? It's not going to be 100% complete, of course, but you're going to get the first taste of it if we're not going to give him credit because of the way that everything collapsed around the firing of Taylor Jenkins. Obviously, time will have passed. There is no interim tag on Isalo any longer. How is he going to use Zach Edey, assuming he plays a game or two in Summer League? How is he going to use Jalen Wells? Is it going to be as a facilitator in terms of developing that skill? Is Zach Edey going to shoot more threes? Or are there going to be different angles in terms of the screens that are set? Maybe it's more off-ball screens. Maybe it's more flare screens, pin downs. How is this all going to integrate and mold and evolve under new leadership that is no longer tied to Taylor Jenkins? Jenkins is the boogeyman that hopefully we're going to be able to move past here, right? We got to accept this Tuomas Isalo era, even if it's not the way that we wanted it to begin. A little bit more of an extensive search for a new coach is something I was hopeful for. I'm guessing a lot of you were as well. But if you're cool with it like me, then you want to see it fully implemented. And the first step towards that is Summer League, right? Certainly not full implementation, but it's the start of the conversation. It's the beginning of the journey. I want to see how the Grizzlies roster gets reshaped around Isalo. If quick guards are a priority, bigs that can screen, how do they alter the offense? How does it get tweaked in terms of defense? How do you put a player like Zach Edey in a spot to have his limitations masked as much as you can? That starts to shine through in Summer League play. And I am excited to see that. And I'm also just excited to watch Grizzlies basketball, to be honest with you. To see these guys get back out there, start their journey. It's a chance for Memphis to see what they need, what they don't need. It feels fresh again when you have a coaching change and you understand that you're going to give the keys to the kingdom to somebody new. How is that process going to work out? That's what I'm most excited about with this Summer League potential. And again, J.D. Jackson, to me, assuming he is back in Memphis, which he's under contract, right? It would have to be a trade or something like that. They would move on from him. I want to see Gigi, because as hard as I've been on Gigi, I pointed out every time on these podcasts, I wanted Gigi to be the sixth man. I believe in his skill set. I think he can be a really strong NBA player, but he has to recommit on the defensive end. He has to be a passer of the basketball offensively. He can't be a black hole just taking on possessions. He has to grow. Injuries are terrible, and he had a serious one. It limited him significantly. A chance at rebirth, essentially, is what I really want to see from G.G. Jackson. And again, we talked about Cam Spencer. Depending on how much Jalen Wells and Zach Edey play, there's still a real strong youth movement in Memphis that the Grizzlies are going to have to depend on, assuming that they stick around, barring some sort of significant trade. How that fits in this new era with Tuomas Isalo, that matters a lot. Who's going to be the head coach? Who is going to go out to Vegas and be part of the process, right? Obviously, a John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr., those guys aren't going to play. But they might go watch. They might participate in practices. What is the vibe around the team, the energy around this new era? How invested are people going to be, and how much time will it take for the ECLO effect to go into place? We didn't see it very much post Taylor Jenkins. And a lot of the reason was there was only 2 practices, and they were just trying to land the burning plane. Those are my words. Okay, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt there. I want to start seeing what this change is actually going to be. How is he not going to be Taylor Jenkins? If this was the grand plan all along going back to last summer, so be it. How is that plan going to be implemented? That journey starts with Summer League. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Again, I appreciate you guys hanging out with us all week, whether it was me hosting solo, DeMichael hosting solo. It's that time of year where things are a little bit hectic and crazy, at least in my day job. It's wonderful to have his flexibility and all that's going on with him. We're able to get these shows out and talk with you guys and keep the everyday flow as much as we can. But the ability to go solo, right? And you guys being with us, it's appreciated. We'll be back together on Friday, getting down on a Friday. The dynamic duo will ride once more, talking Grizzlies basketball, checking in with the playoffs, NBA at large, and so much more. Make sure that you're with us. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Any of those spots would be wonderful places to make yourself at home with Locked On Grizzlies. Be a part of the flow of the community that we're building. And I really do genuinely mean that. It's great in the comments. It's great interacting on social media. The show in 2025 has grown by leaps and bounds year over year, and you guys are to thank for that. So again, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get podcasts. Each and every time an episode drops, you'll be with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. And now that you've made us your first listen, go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show for your second listen. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft next month. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you again so much for being with me here on this Thursday. I am Joe Mullinax. We will catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google, wherever you get podcasts, we're free and available. Make sure you're with us tomorrow. DeMichael and I back together again. See you then.